Evening, everybody.
Oh.
I think
we have still some people in the waiting room joining us, and then we're good to start. Shavua Tov, everybody. We're very happy to have Rav Zarum tonight with us, although it was planned in a different format. But I think we get started, and I will kindly ask Howard, who also made the introductions between Rav Zarum and Midreschet, to briefly introduce Rav Zarum, although at least many of us already probably know him. So Howard, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah. Shavua Tov, everyone. I don't know how many Rabbanim we have on the call, so I'll say Kavod Rabbanim. But welcome, everybody. It's a great honor for me to introduce our guest speaker this evening, Rabbi Dr. Rav Zarum, who is the Dean of the LSJS, the London School of Jewish Studies in London. And only about a week ago, he was officially announced as being the holder of the Rabbi Sachs Chair in Modern Jewish Thought at the school. He worked very closely with Rav Sachs over many years, Zichron Tzadik Livracha, and he's known as a rabbinic leader and a lecturer and author with a passion for teaching of Jewish texts. Many of you know him already from his visit to the Minyan in the past. Some of you will have met him at Limud, where he packs in the audience and tests us with amazing ideas. But he's actually, by training, a theoretical physicist. He has a PhD in theoretical physics from King's College London, leading to a publication of a number of papers on quantum chaos theory, which I think is rather interesting, that you should have a rabbi who's an expert in quantum chaos. And he also completed an MA in adult education with distinction at the Institute of Education in London. As well as being the Dean of LSJS, Rafi serves as the scholar in residence at the Central Square Minyan, Hampstead Garden suburb. He studied at Yeshivat HaKotel in Jerusalem and the Kollel of the Judith Lady Montefiore College in London, where he received his rabbinic ordination. And a smicha was given, amongst others, by the Emeritus Chief Rabbi, Lord Jonathan Sachs at the time, Diane Ezra Basri, the former Av Bet Din of Jerusalem, and Rabbi Dr. Avraham Levy, the Emeritus Spiritual Leader of the Spanish and Portuguese community. So Rafi is a graduate of the prestigious Jerusalem Fellows Program at the Mandel Leadership Institute in Israel. He was the first head of faculty at the Florence Melton Adult Mini School UK and was the director of text-based Jewish education at the UJIA Center for Informal Jewish Education. I could go on, but I won't. He's a regular contributor to not just Limud, but also the Jewish press. He writes articles, he writes books and journals, and we're very privileged, Rafi, to have you with us tonight. Welcome, and I'm sorry that you're not here with us in person, but as some know, we're planning for you to come next November, come what may. So hopefully we'll see you in person in the not too distant future, and this is just a substitute. But thank you so much for being with us this evening. Rafi, over to you.
Thank you so much, Howard. I appreciate that. There we go. It's wonderful to see you all. I wish it was in person, but I'm very happy. It's Motzei Shabbat. You could be watching the latest Disney or Netflix program, but you're here online learning Torah. So I really appreciate that. And it's wonderful to see lots of people that I recognize from your community, Volithofen, and I'm very happy to be invited by the board to teach you tonight. And we're going to get into the learning. It's been a very difficult 2 years. It's actually 2 years ago, I think November, just before the whole process with coronavirus began, that I visited you. One of the last trips that I did, actually. So I have very fond memories, and please God, things should get better. That this new Omicron should not grow too much. People should be healthy. Thank God, from what I've read, nobody's died from Omicron. Thank God that people are getting ill, but no one has died so far. And hopefully things will begin to get better, and your community can open up, and Am Yisrael can go back to shul, which is what we really want. So I'm going to begin, and I'm sitting in my office in London School of Jewish Studies on Motzei Shabbat. It's very quiet here, and if I speak too fast, just go like that, slow down, and I will try to be clear. But I want to discuss a subject which is part of a book that I'm writing about difficult questions in Judaism, difficult, challenging ideas. And one of them is the idea of us being Am Nivchar, the chosen people, the special people, the Am Segula, the treasured people of God. And the question I want to ask is, isn't it just a little bit racist to say that we're the chosen people, that we're better than everybody else? Is that a way to talk, really? So I want to research with you what it's about and give some suggested answers and approaches, and then I'll take feedback from you on what you think. So that's the plan. Now, I sent in a Daf Makorot in advance, but I'll show it here as an attachment, and we'll go through. And feel free at any point in the chat to write a question and to ask a question or make a statement, and I can check that as we go. So here we go. Here it is. Already something in the chat there. That's good. Oh, okay. Very good. Thank you. So here we go. This is my what does it mean to be the chosen people? Let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger. There we go. That's good. The wonders of technology. I've been teaching on screen for quite a long time now. So there you go. So I want to show you how much, not just we're the chosen people, but how much we talk about being the chosen people. Every morning in Shacharit, in the Birkat HaTorah, in the blessings of the Torah, we say in the Brachot, Asher Bacha Banu Mikol Amim, who chose us from all the peoples, every morning, every day of the year. And in the Chagim, on Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, in the Amida, every Amida, special Amida that we have for the Chagim, whether it's Shachat, Mincha, Ma'av, or Musaf, we say, Asher Bachatanu Mikol Amim, you chose us from all the peoples. Ahavta Otanu, you loved us. Vatzita Banu, when you wanted us. V'mamtanu Mikol Lashonot, and you raised us above all the other languages. This is very triumphalist. This is very much, we're better than everybody else. And that's in our tefillot, and there's other places. But in the Torah, especially in Sefer Devarim, we see the language used over and over again. In chapter 4, we talk about when Moshe, remember, the book of Devarim is Moshe's swan song. He spends 5 weeks talking to the Bnei Yisrael, his final speech before he passes away. It's the longest sermon of all time, 5 weeks, and which is not bad for a man who used to not be able to speak. Oh, hang on 1 second. Just hang on, very 1 second here. I think there's a cleaner here who doesn't realize I'm here. Literally 1 minute. Sorry, yeah, I'm just here working.
Oh my God.
No, don't worry. Don't worry.
I was close everything.
Oh.
I forgot something.
Oh, thank you.
You stay here.
Yeah, thank you. So it's the cleaners of the building. She was very worried, so I'm so sorry. So I come in at night. I turn the lights on, but they don't always see me. So there you go. So I didn't get locked in. That's good. Right. So chosen, chapter 4. Remember, as I said, when one of the first things that Moshe Rabbeinu said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, one of the first things Moses said to God was, Lo ish devarim anochi, in Shemot. Lo ish devarim anochi, I'm not a man of words. And then what's the 5th book called? Ve'ela had-devarim asher diber Moshe. These are the words that Moshe spoke. So Moshe learned to speak in the Torah. He found his voice. And in his big speech, in chapter 4, he says, Tachat ki ahav et avotecha, because God loved your ancestors. Vayivcha bezaro acharav. He's going to choose the seed after you. Because of the love for Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, he's chosen us and brought us out of Egypt. And again, in chapter 7, Ki am kadosh ata la'Hashem Elokecha, a holy people to God. Bacha bacha, to you God chose Hashem Elokecha. Liot lo la'am segula, to be a treasured people. mikol amim, more than any other nations. In verse Zayin, lo miru b'chem mikol amim chashak Hashem b'chem vayivcha b'chem. God doesn't choose us because we're many, but we're small. But he says vayivcha b'chem over and over again. He was chosen in chapter 10 as well. Rak b'avotecha chashak, because your ancestors God cherished, lahava otam, to love them. So because God loved Avraham, vayivcha b'zaram, he chose their seed. The same idea. B'chem mikol ha'amim, more than any other nation. So we're better. We're chosen, we're separate because God loved our ancestors. And again, over and over again, in chapter 14, Banim Hashem la'Hashem Elokechem. Children you are to the Lord your God. It's interesting, we're in December. We have Christmas coming, and Christianity always says that Jesus was the Son of God. And he was, as are all the Jewish people. Banim Atem la'Hashem Elokechem. You are children of the Lord your God. And then in verse Bet, Ki Am Kadosh Ata, holy again. Uvacha bacha Hashem, and God chose you liyot lo l'am segula. Again, the same phrase, l'am segula, a treasured, special people, mikol ha'amim, more than other nations. So that's 4 times we have in Devarim the same idea. And the idea of am segula, as you probably know, comes from Har Sinai, from Matan Torah, from the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. In chapter 19, which is the chapter before the 10 Commandments, Hashem, God speaks to Moshe to prepare the people, and he tells them, Tishma b'koli, listen to my voice, ushma tmet briti, and keep my covenant, v'tem li segula, because you are treasured to me, mikol ha'amim, more than all the other nations, or mikol, from all the other nations, ki li kol ha'aretz, because all the earth belongs to me, says God. Now look at what Rashi says here on this phrase, Kili kol haaretz. V'lo tamru atem levadchem, sheli ve'ein li achrim imachem, and don't think that only you belong to me and there's no one else. Kili kol haaretz, because the whole earth is mine. God is saying, don't think I'm just the God of the Jewish people, which was the idea of the gods in the ancient world, right? The gods of Egypt belong to Egypt. And when you conquered another country, you took over their gods. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not like the other gods. God is not just the God of the Jewish people. God is the whole God of the whole world. Kili kol haaretz. God said, I could have chosen anybody. Kili kol haaretz. But then look what Rashi adds. Vehem, but they, the other nations, be'enai, in my eyes, lefanai, in front of me, lichlum, are klum. If you know your modern Hebrew, klum, they're nothing. Now, if you're, learning in Cheder and you read this Rashi, a teenage boy or girl leading, what will you think? You will think that the other nations are not important, and they're not as special as the Jewish people. Is this what we want to teach our children, that we think we're better? Isn't this an idea that's very negative in the world, to believe that some people are better than others? Are we not all created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God? And yet in the Torah, consistently, and in our tefillot, in our prayer, we're told that we're better. So how do we handle this? What does this mean? Why does the Torah write in this way? And I'm going to show you 3 answers to this problem, to this challenge, this problem. And one of them you won't like very much. It's very negative, and we have to look at it and understand it in historical context. I'm going to tell you a story in 3 stages. Stage 1, the love story. Stage 3, some dangerous racial issues in the medieval period, and then another more modern strand as we go forward. Okay? If at this point you've got any questions or comments, feel free to write in the chat. I'm very happy to hear. But it's great that there's such quiet now. I'm trying to make a poster for all the rabbis in the United Kingdom, which says, which has on it to mute in 4 big letters, M-U-T-E, mute. And I tell the rabbi, when people are talking in shul, just hold it up like that, and everyone will go quiet. That's the hope. But if it works, if the button works, or even get a button and you just press it, and a big mute comes on, and see if people react. But you have to relate. Anyway, back to this. Any questions? No? Good. So let's keep going. This is the first approach. I'm going to say God didn't choose the Jewish people, or rather, God did choose the Jewish people. But why did God choose the Jewish people? Because the Jewish people chose God. Now, there's a very famous phrase about that, from William Norman Uhr. He said, "How odd of God to choose the Jews." That was his little poem. How odd of God to choose the Jews. He didn't like it. And the response, people said, there's no source for this, but you can find it all over the internet. The response to him is, not so odd. The Jews chose God. Now, where's that idea from? Shoshana's just mentioning sugula means masugal, capable of. There's something special about them. We'll get into that, Shoshana. Nice that. So let's look, what does it mean the Jews chose God? So there's many midrashim about this, but the one I want to concentrate on, the approaches of Avraham Avinu. Why does God appear to Avraham in chapter Yudbet 12 of Bereshit, out of nowhere, and says, Lech lecha, leave your land, I'm going to make you special? Why does God choose him? And the Chazal, the rabbis, are very fascinated by this. There's a lot of sources. I once collected them all the midrashim of what they think, why did God choose Avraham? Because in the previous parak, at the end of Yud Aleph, it's just got 3 verses about Abraham's childhood, that he was one of 3 brothers and his father, and they began to leave. Why? So why did God choose him? And the Rambam has a long story, how Abraham found HaKadosh Baruch Hu for himself, and was challenged by the local king Nimrod, and came to his own belief in God. And only after that did God speak to him. So can you see the issue? Did God choose to speak to Abraham? Yes, but he only chose to speak to Abraham because Abraham looked and found God first. So you see, it's a two-way relationship. And you see this in this wonderful midrash, a very late midrash from Yalkut Shimoni on the Torah. It's on the first pasuk of Bilam, when he tries to curse the Jewish people and he blesses them. And he says, Ki me Rosh Tzurim erenu. I saw you from Rosh Tzurim. It's a great place to visit in Israel, Rosh Tzurim. But what does it mean that you are the top of the rocks? Does that mean he's just standing on a rock? Or is there a deeper idea? I was looking at Hadar's hijacking of the computer. Yes, thank you for that. Okay, so this is the story. What does it say? Mashal HaMelech. It's like a metaphor, an allegory, a story of a king. What does it mean? Shama Vakesh Livnot, who wanted to build. He wanted a building project, and what happens? And he digs in the foundations, and it's a swamp, and there's water, and he can't find a solid base in order to build his building. You know, when the contractor wants to build a house, they've got to get a solid foundation. Nowadays, they just pour if it's too muddy, they just pour more and more concrete till it's so weighed down that it's stable. But in olden times, they would try and reach to a rock. They had a solid thing to build upon. And it says at last he hit the rock. We've got it here. Here I can build. Right? And that's the story, that he has to dig down before he can build. Now, what's this about? Similarly, God wanted to build the world. And he was sitting, and he was looking for Dor Enosh. He was looking at the future generations that would happen in the world. He was looking at future generations. And Umador Mabul, and he saw the generation of the flood that would act immorally. Amar and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said to himself, Ha'ech ani boreh et ha'olam, u'risha'im elu amdim, u'machasim oti. How can I build the world when all these wicked people are going to come up in time and really annoy me? Machasim oti, annoy me. Then, Kevan shetziper HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Avraham. When God saw Avraham, she'atid la'amod, that he would one day stand and find God and do chesed and be a good person. Amar, then God said, Harei matzati potalev not aleha. I found a foundation, a solid rock to build upon. Yisod et ha'olam, to build the world upon. That's why in Yeshaya, in Isaiah, we say in chapter 50, Hibitu et hatzor, hutzavtem. Look back to the rock from which you were hewn, which you were cut from. Hibitu el Avraham avichem. Look back to Avraham, your father. We are cut from the same stone as Avraham Avinu. So Avraham was called a Tzur, and Yisrael are called Tzurim. How do we know? Ki merosh Tzurim erenu. I saw the heads of the rocks. That means I saw the Jewish people. So it's a wonderful midrash, this. And what does it say? That God chose Avraham because Avraham chose God. And more than that, if Avraham hadn't chosen God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu would never have begun creating the world. And therefore, the choice, it's not a story of being better than other people. It's actually a love story. The language of the Torah should not be read as a racial statement. It should be read as a romance between God and the Jewish people. It's a love story. And we see it here in this in the Gemara, this next one, in the Gemara Chagiga, where it quotes two Pesukim from Devarim. Et Hashem he'emarta hayom, v'Hashem he'mircha hayom. Now, avouched is a very bad translation. I think a better one is proclaimed, right? Et Hashem he'emarta hayom. You have proclaimed your connection to God. V'Hashem he'mircha hayom, and God has proclaimed His feelings to you. In other words, it's two-sided. It's the only time in the Torah where it's two Pesukim, you can look it up, where the same verb is used. He'emircha is from amar, to make a statement, to proclaim. We proclaim we like God, God proclaim He likes us. It's equal. Amar lehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. Atem asituni chativa achad. You've made me your sole object of affection. You've made me the one that you love. V'ani esetchem chativa, and I've made you the one I love. How did you do it? Right? So how did you made me the sole object? How? Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. We say God is one. We've chosen God. We only have God. There's no one else. Only you, God. And I've made you my only one, because God said, Yisrael, Goy Echad Ba'aretz. Who is like Israel? One nation in the world. Now, this is how lovers speak. You're the only one. You're the only one for me. Of all the world, I chose you. There's nobody like you. Are you being rude about people when you say that, when you're in love with someone? No, it's how you feel. You're not denigrating others. You're trying to express your love and your feeling of connection with this one individual. And the Torah writes in that way. And so even in Vayikra, where we have that uncomfortable phrase, there's I don't want to hide it from you, but in Yeshaya, it says, there's a midrash that says, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Uma achat atemi mimot halam. You are one unique nation to me from all the nations of the world. As it says in Yeshaya, in Isaiah again, Kol hagoyim ka'ayin. All the nations are naught, are nothing, negdo. Sorry, negdo me'efes vatohu nechshavulo. As nothing and void, they are thought of. Now that sounds very negative, but you have to know Isaiah. Chapter 40 is the beginning of the prakim of nechama, of comfort. This Isaiah is writing at a time when the Jews are hated, the Israelites, Yehudah probably actually, is being attacked and hated. And he's trying to reassure them, God loves you more than anybody else. He's saying that because they're feeling low. Like when a parent speaks to a child and says, you're so special, you're so wonderful. It's not being rude to anybody else. I'm talking about this child. It's an emotional statement, not a philosophical statement or a racial statement. It's an act of love. And that fits, if you remember, with all the Pesukim and Devarim. Every time we had the word ahava, each time mentioned, chashak la'ahava, ki me'ahavat Hashem. So you have to understand the Torah has many different styles. It's got poetry, it's got law, it has moments of philosophy and prayer, but it also has emotional relationships. And in the Torah, God is described, lahavdil, as a character. And that character we fall in love with, and they fall in love with us. And Yetziat Mitzrayim, Al Kanfei Nisharim, on eagle's wings, is a love story. And that's why on Pesach, when we tell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, we read the Megillah, Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, which is a love story. That's what it is. Chazal The rabbi saw it as a love story. So the first answer is, it's not racist, it's a love story. That's number one. That's the first approach. Okay? Now, in the original, in the Chazal, now there's a next step. There's a next step where it goes wrong. So A was choosing God. We choose God, not just God chooses us, but we choose God. B, now this is English, the choicest. You can use the word choice. When you say the choicest, you're saying the best. The choicest cheese is the best cheese on the market. So I'm going to argue we were seen by some of the rabbis of history as the choicest people, as actually better than others. Not just ideologically, a little bit like you were describing in the chat, the idea of potential, but actually even biologically, that the Jewish people are biologically better than other people. Now, I know this is being recorded, so if you just heard me say that, please listen to the end of the shir. Otherwise, you're going to be very upset with me. So everything I say now, and I'll keep saying it, is listen to the end of the shir. Do not quote me out of context. You know what they'll do, right? They'll cut that piece and stop before I say, do not quote me out of context, and then carry on. That's the nature of the world. But what can I do? But these are the sources I can't hide. And I'm going to read to you from Yehuda Halevi. Yehuda Halevi was an amazing poet and philosopher in medieval Europe, Spain, in the 12th century. And he writes a very important book called the Kuzari, when the Jewish people were feeling low and depressed, to inspire them about their role. And in it, he gets quite specific about the Jewish people being better than others. I didn't get a chance to get all the Hebrew. I'll just show you one bit later. This is the translation, but you can get on Sefaria, the Hebrew original. But I found one of them to show you in a minute. So let me read them to you from book 1. God chose Israel as his people from all the nations and allowed his influence to rest upon them. So that's about choice. But now look more. You know that the primal elements gradually evolved metals, then plants, then animals, then humankind, and then the treasure, Segula Shel Ha'amim, Shel Olam. The whole progression took place for the sake of this treasure. In the Kuzari's view, there are 5 kinds of physical things. There is inanimate matter, like metals, solids, rocks. Then there's plants, which is living matter, doesn't move, plants. Then there's animals, living beings that move. Nefesh chaya, it says in chapter 1 of Breshit. Nefesh chaya means that move, are animated. And then above them are humans. And then above them is the treasure of humankind, and that's us. So in the biological hierarchy of reality, Jewish people are biologically on a higher level than non-Jews. Don't quote me out of context. I feel uncomfortable writing this, but I will explain why he did this. And there's many examples. Look, the sons of Yaakov were distinguished from other people by divine qualities, which made them, so to speak, like Melachim. We're on a higher, because remember, above humans are angels, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we are nearer to the angels, the Jews, and the non-Jews. Any non-Jew who joins us unconditionally shares our good fortune without having been quite equal to us, because we are the treasure of humankind. I actually found that one in Hebrew just now, actually. You can see it here. Okay? V'chol hanilveh eleinu min ha'omot miprat yigiehu min ha'tova she'itava b'ra eleinu. Right? So is this 27 for doing? Yes. Right. They're not, but they're, however, without being equal to us. He says this. Look. Ach lo yeh shaveh imanu. They are not shaveh to us. They're not the same as us. Right? He says, we are chosen above everybody else. They're not like us. Those who, now this is a great question. What about a convert? What about converts? Again, if biologically Jews and non-Jews on a different level, how can you convert? It doesn't make sense biologically, right? It's like a human trying to be with an animal. Lahavdil. Don't misquote me, but I'm just explaining this. Look what he says. Those who become Jews do not take equal rank with born Israelites. He has to say that because if he believes on a biological existential level, though at a higher level, then he has to say that, right? Who are specially privileged to attain prophecy, whilst the former, the convert, can only achieve something by learning from them. And they can only become pious and learned, but never on the level of Nevuah. They can never reach the level that a Jew can reach. That's quite shocking, right? Now you should know there are some strands who follow the Kuzari very specifically. We're going to see the Zohar in a minute. One approach that follows this is a Chabad Lubavitch. They believe in this idea, but their explanation of conversion for Chabad is very different. If you ask a Chabad Rav, he'll explain. He says, no, every convert, he says, they will say, is a lost soul. The generations before was a Jew that married out. And now the nefesh, the soul, has found their way back, after a few generations, to marry back in the Jewish people. And therefore they are on the same level. That's how Chabad gets out of this Kuzari problem. Because otherwise, to marry a non-Jew would be a metaphysical impossibility. And something you wouldn't, why would you do? Because it's different levels. So this is the way out. But let me show you, this is also in the Kuzari. By the way, in the Tanya uses these ideas. That's why Chabad take this very seriously. But let me just quote you from the translation of the Kuzari. It's a very good translation by Sloninsky from 64. In the introduction, he says the following. He says, the Kuzari's book is an elaborate theory of an innate superhuman distinctiveness, inhering the Jewish people as amounting to a special soul form, special nefesh. The climax, which everything converges in the book, is the notion of election, of being elected, chosen, and of the unique and supernatural character of the Jewish people and its history. That's what the Kuzari says. Nobody likes talking about it, but that's what it says. And I'm shocked. Why is that there? The Zohar, which was, I'll say, published in the 13th century, we know that by Moshe DeLeon, it was published in the 13th century, has the same approach. We won't go into it now, but very briefly, he talks that every human being is created as a tselem. Ach, but tselem yahalech ish. And each person follows their tselem. And then he says, aval, let me just get this in my notes. Aval, he says, but in the case of Jews who are holy, this tselem is holy and comes from a holy place. But then he says, la'akum, the idolaters, tselem miyun zinin bishen, right? And he says, mistata de misufta, right? Misitra, so misitra misufta, which is from the dark side, the defiled side. And then he says, he continues, yes, evil species, as it were, is not as good. So not only are Jews biologically different to non-Jews, but the non-Jewish body, that tselem, their image, their essence, is from the sitra acha, is from the dark side. So why would a Jew marry a non-Jew? It's like good and evil bashing into each other. Why would you do that? So he says, and then he says even more, he gives a halachic example based on the Gemara. He says, is there tumah of a dead body if they're not Jewish? So it's a debate in the Gemara whether a non-Jewish body makes tumah for a Kohen. Right, nowadays, we don't know if the body's Jewish, not Jewish, so you always assume it's tumah and the Kohen doesn't go near. But the Gemara discusses that technically you could argue that a non-Jewish body maybe is not tumah. Why? This explains why he gets it from the Zohar. The Gemara doesn't say this, but the Zohar says this. The Gemara has other reasons, but the Zohar says this. Why is the dead body of an Israelite defiled, while the dead body of a non-Jew does not defile, does not make tumah? For when an Israelite dies, all the sanctifications of their master depart. A Jew had a kedusha in them of a higher human species. And when they die, that kedusha goes away. And that means it makes the body tamei, because it lost the kedusha. But with a non-Jew, they were unclean when they were alive. They didn't have that special thing. So when they die, what difference? There's no tumah. Do you like this? Are you uncomfortable? Me too. Don't misquote me. I'm going to keep adding this in, right? because it's not nice and it's very difficult to read. And the Tanya follows this and some other Hasidic sources as well. Why did they write in this way? They took Am Segula, Am Nivcha, the chosen people, and turned it from an idea, from a love story, into a biological definition, an existential definition of the Jewish people. And the modern, I don't know about you, maybe you think this is true. Maybe you feel this is true, that Jews are better than non-Jews. There are definitely many Jews out there who think they're better than non-Jews, right? And they think their sect is better than other sects, right? Whatever, but it's yichus gone mad in my mind. It's a dangerous thing. The question is, why did the Kuzari and the Zohar write like this? And you have to answer this in historical context. That's the secret. When you have these, you have to understand them. And I learned at London School of Jewish Studies, Jews College, as Rabbi Sachs did, and we learned the historical context of these sources. Where was the Kuzari living? He was living in Spain. And what was going on? The world was going mad. The Muslims and the Christians, the so-called enlightened monotheists, were fighting each other, were killing each other in order to get the promised land. Remember? The Crusades, we have the first Crusades going in the 11th century through Europe to take Eretz Yisrael away from the infidel, which was the Muslims in the Christian mind. And they thought, well, there's all these infidels in Europe along the way, let's kill them. And that's us, the Jews. We have 2 kinot that we still say every year on Tisha B'Av to remember the way we were treated during the Crusades. I want to quote to you from a book that actually Michelle Rosen, remember Michelle, you first talked about this book with me, The Silk Roads, a wonderful book about history, which quotes about what was going on. Let me quote it to you. I've got it here. 66 over here, just getting the quote. Yes, Jews of Europe witnessed shocking violence at the hands of the supposedly noble crusaders. In the Rhineland, women, children, and the elderly had been butchered in a sudden escalation of anti-Semitism. Jews were paying the price for the refocusing of Western Europe's manpower and attention towards the East. The bloodlust was directly linked to the idea that the Jews were responsible for Jesus' crucifixion and that the lands of Israel should be held by the Christians of Europe. So when Halevi was a young boy, he saw these mad battles of these so-called noble religions fighting each other and killing each other. Are you surprised that he didn't think they're all mad and they're not even human, they're animals, and that we're better than that? We're not like animals, that the Jews are better? You can understand, if you lived through the blood and the violence of medieval Europe, why some Jews would conclude that the Goyim, and I'll say it in that way, are Meshuggah, and they're crazy, and they don't have a tzelem, they don't have a soul. How can they act in this immoral way? That's what they got to. Now, I'm not justifying it. I'm not justifying it, but I'm explaining to you how we can understand that these ideas grew. That's my defense or explanation of the second approach. And some people, as I said, still keep it to this day. They solve the issue of a convert by saying that actually they were always a lost soul. And they also try and say maybe this is referring to idolatry and not to every non-Jew. It's a debate, but this strand is still around. Did Yehuda Halevi know about the Crusades? Absolutely, absolutely. He knows about Europe, absolutely. We know about those things going on and the fights going on, absolutely. It was clear about that. And definitely in the Zohar as well. So let me now go to you to the third approach. The third approach I want to give. Again, so the first approach was we chose God. It's a love story. The second approach was this strand. It's not a major strand, but it's an important strand, that we are the choicest people. And the third approach is, yeah, we're chosen, but we're chosen for a job, to serve. Let me show you what I mean with these sources. Remember we had that phrase, Am Segula? Mikol ha'amim, God said, you are segula, you are treasured to me more than all the other nations. Why? Because God, the whole earth is mine and I chose. The next pasuk, a very important pasuk, says, Va'atem tiyuli, you will be to me, mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now, what does that mean, a kingdom of priests? How can a whole nation be priests? The whole idea of a priest is a priest serves or helps, leads the people in religious issues. If everyone's a priest, then nobody's a priest. Who are their priests for? How can you be a whole kingdom? So let's look now at a different strand, not the strand of the Kuzari and of the Zohar, but of the more rational strand. And this is the son of the Rambam, Rabbi Avraham ben HaRambam, who wrote a commentary on the Torah. We have Sefer Bereshit and Shemot. It's available on Sefaria. It's not a famous commentary. This was, we know it in the modern world, but this was lost for a long time. Some people had the Sfarim, but they weren't famous. Nowadays we have them, but it's definitely written by the son of the Rambam. And he actually says earlier in this commentary on this pasuk that he's quoting his father. He learned this from his father. And what does he say? He says, Hasod b'ma'amar mamlechet. Right? He says, why does it say mamlechet? V'lo amar v'atem tili kohanim. Why does it say mamlechet kohanim, a kingdom of priests? Why not just say you'll be priests and a holy nation? Why mamlechet? Right? Why? Because according to the Chachamim, ta'amu, their reason is tiyu nichbadim u'ba'alei sararak malachim. You will be distinguished and world leaders like kings. What does a king do? A king runs a country. A king has a great political power to influence an entire nation, and that's your job. You're going to be a king, a kingly nation. Uma shenirebi bo shakavana bo, and to me he says the kavanah, the idea is shetiyuli melachim. You will be my kings, right? You will be my kings on earth. Al ha'olam, for the whole world. Umanhigim lahem, and guide them. Yes, you are chosen, but not because you're better. You're chosen to have a job to do, to lead the world. Now that's interesting. Now, if you say to a leader, you've got a special job to lead, does that make the leader better? No, his job is to serve the people. The Sephardo, a few centuries later, says something similar. Ki tiyu mamlechet kohanim lehavin lehorot lechol hamin ha'enoshi, to instruct, to teach hamin ha'enoshi, the entire human race, lekro kulam b'shem Hashem, to call in the name of God, or la'avdor, to serve him. The job of the Jewish people is to be ambassadors for the world to believe in God. Right? You're not better. Your job is to teach the world. Do we see? Now, this sounds very modern approach that the Jewish people should be for the world and not for themselves. We should look after each other. But even the Sforno in the 16th century said this. You should know, by the way, that the Rambam, as we know, was very philosophically knowledgeable, and the Sforno, being in Italy, went to university. Right? The Italians were the first rabbis. Yehuda, what he wrote the Nofet Sufim, Messalion. He went to university. The Italian rabbis in the 14th, 15th century were the first to go to university in Padua, because Padua was competing with Barcelona. They wanted to get more people, so they let Jews in to do medicine. So the first places where the Jews really brought universal ideas was actually from the Italians, interestingly. And the Sforno saying it here, that our job is to teach the world. Now, this was known, it wasn't a major strand, but these ideas were known early. Lovely idea, David, he's saying, Emir Lacha, like Emir in Arabic. You're saying, David's saying, are you saying it from Emir Hayom? Is that what you're saying, David, on this? Emir, probably Emata, is that what you're saying? Interesting idea. You're saying is the Emir in Arabic and the Emirates? I have to look that up. It's interesting. Interesting. Never thought about that. Okay, sorry, I'm just noticing the chat from just now. Okay, so but let me show you this idea. You know, the Jews, even in the Sforno's time, yes, in Ben HaRambam, even though they philosophically understood that that's our role, we didn't get a chance to do it. We were surrounded by other nations. We were weak. We weren't respected. It's only in the modern world where this idea grew. And now I want to quote to you from Hirsch in the 19th century. Now this is in Germany. This is where the Jews are listened to an extent. The Jew takes a role in the modern world. I will argue, by the way, that Rabbi Sachs's approach as an ambassador, as a Nasi, was this approach that a rabbi can speak to the world and have a moral lesson for everybody. That strand was always there. Yes, we had the Kuzari. Yes, we had the Zohar and the Tanya, which had this, we were better than. But the other approach was no. Segula means chosen to serve. Look what Hirsch says. Segula means that we must become a treasure, a possession over which nobody else has any rights, which has no relationship whatsoever to anybody else. So the use of the word for the fundamental condition which is demanded of us in our relationship to God indicates we must become completely and exclusively God's possession. In other words, that's the purpose of being a Jew. Now, you can't think you're better. Your whole job is to be a servant. L'sharet, kohen, look at Rashi. Rashi says a kohen is l'sharet, is to serve. You think you're better because you serve society? Your job is to be a servant. This is what happens to politicians. They think they're better than society. Look at my country. I'm sure in yours as well. But my country at the moment is pretty bad. They think they're better. They can tell the whole country not to have parties at Christmas last year, and they have their own parties. Politicians think they're better. No, your job is to serve. Your money is government money to be used for the government, not for your own pockets. But there's a danger in power. You can start thinking you're better. Never, no. So I'm just looking at the chat, always keeping up. Yes, Yehuda de Leon, that's right, in the Menachet Sufim, that's right, thank you. So look what Hirsch says. Kili kol aretz, for this relationship, now what Hirsch says here is so dramatic, it's amazing. For this relationship you are to bear towards me is really nothing special. It is nothing but the beginning of the return to the normal condition which the world should have to me. The whole of humanity, every nation in the world, is really destined to belong to me and will be ultimately educated by me, up to me. So the Jewish people are what you call early adopters. You know that when there's a new technology or a new idea, there's always some people who get it first. The new iPhone, right? Or the new machine at home. They're called early adopters. The Jewish people were the early adopters of monotheism from Avraham. We discovered God in the world and found God, and God spoke to us. And therefore we became the first people to bring the idea of monotheism to the world that was forgotten. But the whole idea is that everybody does. We're just ahead of the curve. Are we better? No, we're made of flesh and blood, just like everybody else. As Shylock said, if you cut me, do I not bleed? And the blood is just like everybody else. We're not better, says Hirsch. We were just early adopters. Now this, for a modern person, makes more sense. The book I'm writing is to answer modern Jews who are maybe traditional, not so religious, who are asking these questions. Are we the chosen people? Are we better? And my answer is not only are we not better, our job is to help the world, to make a difference out there. Let me quote to you from Hirsch just a bit more. A kingdom of priests means each and every individual of you has to become a Kohen, a priest, to teach and to regulate. A holy nation means individually you are to appear priest-like and to be an example. That's what Hirsch is saying. So that's my third explanation. Number one, we're chosen. It's a love story. Number two, we're chosen because we're biologically better. I don't agree with that, but I understand why that was said. And the third approach, the real idea from the Rambam's son to the Sforno to Hirsch, was we are chosen to give to the world. We're not better. It's a job. It's a job. And every Jew, you know, remember Fiddler on the Roof? What did Tevye say? God, sometimes, couldn't you choose somebody else? Because Tevye was saying, we're chosen because what happens when you choose to be better? Everybody hates you for it. I have a copy in my house, illustrated, given to me, of Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler. It's a horrible book, and when I put it on the shelf, I don't put it with the spine, I turn it round. So my wife doesn't like people seeing it. It's on my shelf, an illustrated Mein Kampf. And when I first got it, about 20 years ago, I looked at the index. What did I look up? Jews. There's 100 quotes about Jews in Mein Kampf of Hitler. He was obsessed. And he saw us as special, as thinking we're better. And he said, we are of the devil and you have to fight them and destroy them. Because he knew the Jews wanted to bring something to the world. And he was the reverse with his Aryan ideas, which is a bit crazy. But the point I'm making is that the Jews have a role in the world to do something important, not because we're better, but to share with the world ideas. Now, the final idea is, but you still think you're better because only if you're Jewish can you do this. Only a Jew can do this. Does that, so even though anybody could convert to Judaism, Jews don't think everybody should convert. So maybe we still think we're better because we've got a special role. So now let me go back to the Rambam. The Rambam, an amazing Rambam at the end of Hilchot Shmita v'Yovel. So you have Shmita coming. So now, so we talk about this. Look what he says. He talks about the Leviim, and he says, "Shehuvdal Levi la'avodat Hashem." The Leviim were chosen to serve God. And their job, the job of the Kohanim, the Leviim, was to teach the people. And he gives a pasuk. They were separated, right? They don't have to fight like Israel. And they don't get inheritance because their job was to be the teachers of Israel. That's why the Leviim didn't get land in Israel and get involved in the battles. Their job was to sit in yeshiva and to learn, right? But not just to learn, but to teach others, to go out and then teach. And now look what the Rambam says in the last halacha. Very often, the last halacha of a major part of his Mishnah Torah has a much deeper philosophical general statement. And look what he says. This is amazing. V'lo shevet Levi bilvad, and not just Levi, ela kol ish ve'ish miba'ei ha'olam. Any person. This is his language for not just any Jew, but any human being. Kol ish ve'ish mi kol ba'alei ha'olam. Anybody from in the whole world. Asher nadva rucho oto v'hevino mida'ato lehavdil la'amod lifnei Hashem, who separates himself from the everyday and through his mind realizes to stand before the one true God, l'sharato or lavdo, to serve God, leidat Hashem, to know God, v'halach yashar k'mo sha'a shema asura Elohim, v'harak me'al tavav kol cheshbonot v'abim, who knows to serve and to know God and to walk straight and to throw off all these other issues, bikshu b'nei adam harei ze nikdash, and to not get lost in these issues, but if they focus on God, they are nikdash kodesh kadoshim, holy of holies, right? They don't have to convert. They can find God as a non-Jewish person in the world. And God is their inheritance. Forever and ever. And they get the same level as a priest or a Kohen. This is an amazing comment of the Rambam, that the Jewish people were chosen, and therefore, because of our education, we become special and to teach the world, because we're taught to do it, to keep the mitzvot, to give tzedakah, to do more. Jewish people give more tzedakah than non-Jews in this country. They measured it. Why? Not because we're better, because we're taught to do it. We're told to do it, so we have to do it, right? Whether we like it or not. But if a non-Jew realizes this of their own volition and finds God and lives, the Rambam says, on the same level. I even found a lovely Midreschet that says this. It's quoting Devorah. Look at this. Devorah isha nevuah esh lapidot. Devorah was a prophetess. And the Midrash says, V'chima teva Devorah shehi hayta shofetet Yisrael ba'etahi. What made her special? That a woman can be a prophet. What does that mean? And look what the commentary says. Me'id ani alai et hashma v'ta'aretz. I call a testimony. I call heaven and earth to say this statement the Midrash is saying, right? Bein Yisrael, bein akum, whether a Jewish person or not just a non-Jew, but avodah zarah, but idolater. Bein ish leish, bein ish bein isha, whether man or woman. Bein eved, bein shivcha, whether you're a manservant or a maidservant or free. Hakol lefi ma'aseh shehu oseh. Everybody. So hakol lefi ha'maaseh shu oseh kach ruach hakadosh shura alav. The level of the Holy Spirit on you depends on what you do. Lefi ha'maaseh shu oseh. Not if you're a Jew or a non-Jew, not if you're a man or woman, not if you're free or a slave, but the way you act in this world will determine how much Ruach HaKodesh is on you. Amazing. And it does it on the pasuk about Devorah, because it was shocking that Devorah, in the ancient world, a woman could be a prophetess and a judge, by the way. How could she be that? Because really, the Midrash is recognizing that a great individual can be immortal. Women were not educated in the ancient world, and they weren't judges, and servants couldn't do things, and non-Jews didn't know this stuff. But if an individual could do it of themselves, then they could be lefi ha'ma'aseh. And this is my answer to the question. Of course, it's not racist. It's the reverse. How can you be racist if your job is to help the world? How can you be racist if it's a love story? Yes, there was a strand in the Khazari, and we understand historically why that happened, but that was never the ideal. Chosenness does not have to be elitist or exclusive. The purpose is for the world, and all can join in. And that's why we go back to Avraham. When he said, Lech lecha me'artzecha, he says, because you will be, he says, and whoever blesses you will be blessed. Your job is to teach the world. To teach the world, Avraham. That's why I'm choosing you. So you're not better, you've got a job. It's a responsibility. But that's what it means to be chosen. To be chosen to have a job. And anyone can convert and be part of it, but you don't have to. The answer is, see, in Christianity and Islam, you have to convert. Otherwise, you don't get Olam Haba in their point of view. But we say you don't have to. The Rambam says, and this Midrash, that if you live a moral life and you find God and you live with morality, then you can get everything that a Kohen or a Levi can get. And it's only to do with the way you act in this world, how much Ruach HaKodesh that you get. That's the strands, the story, I would argue, of Amnicha, of the chosen people. Thank you very much. There we go. Now, happy to take some questions along the way. Over to Sarah.
Thank you very much for this fascinating journey you took us. And I think I'm a little bit relieved that we're not racist, although we are at some points, but that's a different topic. I think I would like to open up the floor for everyone who has a question or a follow-up thought. Please either unmute yourself or let us unmute you. Or if you don't feel comfortable, just have it in writing in the chat. Who may I start with? So maybe I'll start with a context question. You know, just at the very beginning, you quoted 4 sources that all spoke about the Amsgula in Varim. Is that a question, or is that a topic you think is particularly a topic of Sefer Varim, or is that you know, just a coincidence more or less, or is there are probably also other sources?
Well, I mean, it makes sense at Matan Torah when the vision of the future of the Jewish people was given. But then what happens after Matan Torah? We have the golden calf, we have mistakes, we have the 40 years in the wilderness, and it all goes wrong. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides to start with a new generation born in freedom. The next generation in Devarim are the next generation of people. And so now when Moshe summarizes the Torah, he presents the new vision. They're about to enter the land of Israel, and they have to be this Am Nivcha, and that's why it comes there. So it makes sense in the structure of the Torah that it comes at that point. There's a lovely comment in the chat as well. Can you see from who is it? Akiva. It says the root of Segula is Segol, 2 points opposite, and a third one to connect them. According, interesting, the dots, right. According to Kabbalistic, it's a connector, and that would fit. So Segula's treasure is a connects thing. It's interesting to look at the words, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Yep.
So I would just, thank you very much. I would just have a comment / question on your first explanation, which is a love story. So to me, if you think about, let's say the general reactions of, let's say, standard anti-Semitic thing, this explanation that God just loves us more than the other ones makes it even worse. So I think that this would, I mean, if I would tell one of my kids that I love them in specific, of course, I'm not telling them that the other ones are bad, but this would cause a lot of trouble.
Yeah, it's a good point, David. But when people get married, they think that we're all older now, right? And you go to a wedding of these 25-year-olds, and they turn to them and they talk about love as if they're the first people to ever fall in love. And we all sit there going, yeah, that's lovely. They're just young, but they feel it in their minds. This is their expression of love. It is the greatest thing, and no one else understands except for them. So that's the point I'm saying. It's not existentially from your point of view. That's what you mean, David. It's difficult. Look, you won't like this, but it's the same as the bracha shelo asani isha. When a man says, now there are some people who don't say that, and there's another version, Asani Israel, and Rav Henkin says, if you're in a community where it's not appropriate to say it publicly, you don't say it aloud. But I'll tell you a story. When my wife and I had children, we had a difficulty to have children, first of all, and we went in Israel to a gynecologist, and on his wall were all these. Thank God we have a daughter, 2 daughters. We're okay now. But on his wall, David, was photos of all the children that he'd helped couples have, and we were talking. He was a religious man. It was in Israel, and he said, you know, when I say the bracha shelo asani isha, I mean it with kavanah, because I see all these women who have to go through such pain and emotional and biological stress to have a child, that I thank God that I'm not a woman. Now, so he's saying the statement is not philosophically men are better than women. It's I understand from who I am that I'm lucky that I don't have to face that. Again, not justifying, I'm just telling you that point of view. So when a lover speaks, they're not telling the truth. They're saying what it feels like. Right?
Yeah.
I like another example on Seder night, Dayenu, right? If God gave us the Torah and didn't bring us to Israel, Dayenu, it would have been enough. Really? If he'd taken us out of Egypt and not crossed the sea, it would have been enough. Really? If he brought us to Mount Sinai and not given us the Torah, it would have been enough. Really? I don't think so. It wouldn't be enough. But what do the grandparents say at a wedding when the last child gets married? I can die now and I'm happy. Really? You want to die now? It's an emotional reaction. It's not true. It's an emotional statement of extremity in an emotional sense. That's what I think the Torah is written in that way. But that's my understanding. There's a pasuk in Yeshaya, I don't know it by heart. It says, I took the Jewish people out of Egypt and the Ethiopians out of Kaftor and these out of these. There's one hint that Hashem might have a special relationship with other people. That's for them, but I just know mine. I know that God chooses us as special. Maybe God likes other people on, in the Andromeda galaxy. He's got a special relationship with some Greek. I don't know, maybe. We're not the only ones, but we've got a special relationship. Maybe you do as well. I don't know. That's the point I'm making. Rabbi Sachs got in trouble with this, David, in that book, Dignity of Difference, where he tried to explain how each strand has a special relationship with God. That in heaven, there's only one truth. On earth, there's multiple truths. It gets complicated, right? But I'm trying to argue it emotionally. That's my answer. The Torah is a love story. And my justification is Chazal saying Shir Hashirim. But anyway, something to think about. But David, even with your children, right? You tell them you love them equally. They all know it's not the case, right? every my daughter says this. She goes, Abba, she goes, every family knows, all the children know who's the special one. You're not, people nod, it's not just me. They all have this.
And we get asked again and again.
Yeah. So look, when you look at that child, you try and look at them and focus them and make them feel that they're loved infinitely, right? But you have limited time. But so these are the challenges. So that's my first approach. But I hope you like that. That's my argument.
That's great. Thank you.
Great. My pleasure.
We have another question I see from Guido. Maybe Guido, you want to unmute yourself and ask it in public, or shall I read it out for you?
Yeah, I can also. Hi, Rav Zarum. Thanks again for the lecture. And my question, I wrote it. Is there a difference if you speak of Am Segula as part of a minority in Galut in medieval ages, or if you speak of Am Segula as a member of a majority in Israel?
It's a huge issue. It's very important. When we lived in Israel for 2 years, the thing that my wife and I noticed the most was the fact that you're now the majority. It's very weird for us. We lived in England at Christmas time, you know, we have a little Hanukkah, but on the television, it's all Christmas, you know, but in Israel, it's all Hanukkah, you know, or in March, it's Pesach. It's like, you know, they're all saying this so you become the majority. It's a very different feeling. So two things I'll say. Number one, when you're a nation, you can be an Am Segula much better. So, you know, Jews can give in Switzerland and in London, in England, we can give to charity. And the Jewish community can do good. But the state of Israel can do good on another level. When there's a problem around the world, a famine, we can send doctors, and as a nation, we can do good on a level that no one else can be an example. So we can be a national example, which you can't be when you're a smaller group within a host society. But your point, I think, is a bit different as well. It's about how we treat the other people in Israel when you're the majority, and how you treat Israeli Arabs or Palestinians or other people in your country. Now, that is an issue. That's less an issue of Am Segula. That's an issue from, I don't know it by heart. It's in Vayikra, in Achemot Kedoshim, which says, when you go to the land of Israel, if you don't keep close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, follow, then Hashem will vomit you out. I wish I knew it by heart, sorry. Well, I wish I was my father. My father knows Tanakh Baal Peh, but the Pesukim that apply to them is different. Kamasa Eret, where is it? At the end. I don't think I can find it on the spot. Lota Chalel, no, where is it? Yes, okay, here we go. It's in end of Achemot. It says, Al titmu b'chol eila, don't do immoral things, and nitamu hagoyim, which the non-Jews have done, ashani mavshlich b'chem, which I'm put before you, v'titameh ha'aretz, ve'ef God on it, right, v'taki ha'aretz et kol yoshveha, that the land will vomit you out. And I first heard this talked about, by the way, Guido, from Rav Jakovovitz, the previous chief rabbi. He said, because he was a very left-wing, he believed in a two-state solution in Israel very early on. And he said, I remember him saying this. He said, you know, I spoke to the rabbis' conference in Israel. And he said, I said to the rabbis in Israel, you all talk about not giving up back land and about Israel has all the Holy Land. You mustn't give any land back. And he said to them, why don't you speak about the immorality in Israel, about prostitution or about money laundering and about theft? Why don't the Rabbanim get up and say, we must be a more moral society? Why don't you talk about that? Because the Torah says, if you don't act morally, Israel is so holy, it will spew, you know, to be sick. It will sick out the Jewish people if we're not moral. Why don't you say that? Drakovitz said this to the Rabbanim in Israel, and they said to him, "Oh, it's different. It's different. We don't talk about that. We just talk about not giving up land." And I remember, as a young boy, I was like 20. I was like, "This is so powerful." You know, we have to be a moral example, not just think about ourselves, but a moral example. So yes, Guido, these Pesukim are about that. We must be moral in Israel. The Jewish people have an absolute right to the land of Israel. No one can take it from us, except HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If we act immoral, we will be thrown out. The Torah says, spewed out if we act immorally. All right? So I'm not telling you what politically to be, but if we don't do it morally, then we will be spewed out of Israel. But that's that issue. So that's where we have to be. The Am Segula, I think, is to be an Am for other Amim. I think that's the example of it. But of course, it could possibly apply here as well. That's my very long answer. There's a lot more to it, but that's what I think.
We have a lot of hands raised, so I'll start with Howard, maybe. Would you like to address your question?
Okay, Rafi, thank you very much. Really fascinating. I wanted to ask you a little bit about what leadership is and how you see the leadership working, and whether it's a matter of being in the front, leading, or whether it's influencing, like the Rambam did in his time. There were other very famous Jews in Spain before the expulsion, and there have been many Jews over the years who've been there influencing rather than necessarily being out there in the front as the king. How do you reconcile that with the?
Well, when he says Kumalachim, like kings, Howard, it doesn't mean you have to be the king. It means you have to take the responsibility of a king, to feel you've got responsibility to society. So in England, we've had some Jewish MPs who've been in government and had great power, others who influence. Do you know the story? Have you heard Nelson Mandela talk about the first place as a lawyer he was given a job in a Jewish law firm? And that's why he always respected Jewish people, because a Jew gave him a job. And how many I've been to teach in South Africa, and I didn't know how important South African Jews were in the end of apartheid. And the chief rabbi there, Cyril Harris, who's from Scotland, but I knew him. He was a rabbi in Edgware. His son Johnny and I grew up together. Cyril Harris was very close to Mandela, and taught people these ideas. It was very positive. So Jews in different countries around the world, when they've been moral examples, have made a difference. Privately and publicly on all different levels, whether in medicine, in education. You can do it as an individual. One person can make a difference, can be a role model of an example. I was helping a person in therapy recently, and the therapist, not Jewish, said, I love the Jewish people because I was taught by this amazing Jewish therapist, and he was such a role model for all of us. He transformed hundreds of lives of all these psychologists, and he saw it as his Judaism. So each person should be a role model for the world. But the Jewish people, you've got to feel that responsibility. Howard, I wear kippah, right? You know, and I sit on the bus, and if I'm sitting down, if an old person comes, I have to stand up, because if I don't, it's a chil Hashem. But I don't take this off to hide. I have to do this. I feel I'm not a nice person, or I've got to. It makes me have to be good. the mitzvot. We're not better. We're just like everybody else. But it forces us individually, in our families, in our community, in every business. Role models can make a big difference, right? And you hear those stories of young. Can I tell you one great story that I heard from Rabbi Sachs about this, Howard? It was I don't know if I've told this to you. It's about the Nobel laureate. What's his name? Oh gosh, I'm forgetting it now. He was, I think, Scottish or Welsh. He translated Beowulf. What was his name? Became the poet laureate in England. Oh, what's it? Oh, I've forgotten now.
Not Ted Hughes.
No, Ted Hughes one, but it was a later one. I think he was Irish, maybe. He was Irish. Seamus Heaney, that's it. Seamus Heaney, right? Was the Nobel laureate. And he won a Nobel Prize, Seamus Heaney. And Rabbi Sachs taught me, he says, Rafi, there's a bracha you say when you meet somebody, Chochmah Bagoim, a great person from the non-Jewish world. He says, but the rabbis didn't tell you, how do you choose, right? What level? He says, for me, Nobel Prize winners. If I meet a Nobel Prize winner, I make this bracha. So he met Seamus Heaney, and he said to him, you know, I want to give a bracha to you that we Jews said. He said this bracha, and Seamus Heaney said, Chief Rabbi, I need to tell you a story. He said, when I was a young Irish boy growing up in Ireland, I was a Shabbos goy. You know what Shabbos goy is? When the Jews, right, this is going back in the early 20th century, wanted to light the fire before Shabbat, they would go and light the fire for the Jews, and then go back home. And he said, I was a Shabbos goy. He said, and once after Shabbat, the family called me over and they gave me a bright new penny to thank me for what I did. A shiny new penny. And I went back to my mother and I showed her the penny. Look what they gave me. And my mother clipped me around the ear. And she said to me, Seamus, never take money to help another person serve God. And when Rabbi Sachs heard that story, and when I hear that story, I cried. This is a moral lesson that Seamus he learned from his mother, which then he told to Rabbi Sachs, which I can tell to you. There's an example to be a role model, that anybody can be a role model of how to live in this world. And so it's amazing what one person can influence in the world. So a king is how you look at the world. Do you feel responsible to be an example, to not think you're better, but to try and work hard, not to say I'm better, but I've got this job to try and make the world a better place. And there's many moral people out there. You know, if I was, what's his name, who ran Microsoft, Bill Gates.
Bill Gates. If
I was Bill Gates and I had 50 billion, would I give it all away? Would I? I'd like to think I would, but I don't know. He's, you know about COVAX, about helping third world countries get vaccinations. That's a Kiddush Hashem. I mean, on a level, one man, lucky that he had this job to do, what you can do. And I'm sure he's been influenced and inspired partly by some Jews in his business as well. So you can be a king in any level of society, in any level of the way you work, if you see that as a responsibility, right? If you feel that's your role to do that, then you can do it. That's what I believe. So sorry for going on, but you know, now that I'm the Rabbi Sachs chair, I feel I always want to bring in some stories about him in my teaching, but there's so many. So there you go.
Thank you very much. I think there are still 3 questions, but we could go on and on for another.
I'll try and be shorter, but yeah, we'll answer quickly. Yes. Thank you,
Mr. Adler, do you want to ask your question?
Mr. Adler?
Oh,
yeah.
Look, you have proposed 3 solutions for the problem. When I look at the prayer of Musaf from Yom Tov, we say, Ata b'chartanu mikol ha'amim, ha'afta otanu v'ratzita banu. Well, it's a little presumptuous to tell it, but apparently we choose the first solution.
No, because we can say that b'charta, you've chosen us to be responsible to change the world.
Ha'afta otanu v'ratzita banu,
Right.
v'romamtanu.
Yes, and I'm saying that's how I feel in love. I feel God chose me. But the Rambam says God chose anybody who wants to be. But I feel chosen. It's emotional, it's not existential.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? I know it's challenging. You can always see it that way. That's the danger in these verses, to read them in different ways. That's why I've tried to give you, not what I think, I've given you Chazal, all the way, Chazal. So you can see the different paths that you want to choose. Interesting, right? It's challenging. I know. I wish I was with you. We could study together and spend time reading it and look at the Kuzari. But this is difficult stuff. I've written a very long chapter about this in my book. Please God to come out next year about this. But thank you.
Read it. So Eva, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm struggling with the Hirsch. He wrote this in the 19th century, and that was after the Enlightenment, after religious tolerance was pronounced, even after the Jews got granted civil rights. And now all of a sudden, you know, what is he talking about in this context? Is he talking about ethics? And I suppose Hirsch would be the last to define Judaism as a religion, as ethics, you know, in the context of Reform Judaism that did exactly that. So it can't be ethics. So I come to the conclusion that it's a kind of a polemic against anti-Semitism, and he's trying to say that there is value, that the Jews have. It's for me, I can read it as a biological.
Eva, I understand that, but I think I don't agree. Just because he was against reform, it doesn't mean he was against Segula. He felt that you can be loyal to your faith and be an example to others. He was upset with reform because they'd abandoned their faith to be like others. That's different. Right? Hirsch did feel a responsibility to the world. He understood that Am Yisrael had that potential, and post-Enlightenment, it was just beginning. It wasn't there yet. There was a lot of difficulties, but there was the potential there. So I don't think he was saying it. He writes too much about that we were early adopters, that others could do it. If you read the whole section, it's much longer. I've cut a bit of it. I don't get that thrust from him. I don't. I'm sorry. But,
okay.
Eva, I do agree with you that this is what happens. In the need to be different to reform, orthodoxy becomes more fundamentalist. And we get afraid of talking about caring for the world because we sound like reform. And reform, I had a friend who became a Masorti rabbi, conservative rabbi, and he used to quote Rashi a lot. Right? He used to quote Rashi. And the other rabbi says to him, you shouldn't quote Rashi so much. And they go, why? He goes, because the Orthodox quote it. He goes, what do you mean it's Rashi? Right? And that's what happens, right? That people get afraid to quote others. So I once saw, have you heard of Abram Joshua Heschel? So Heschel was a great Talmid Chacham, but he became part of the conservative movement. And all the Heschel day schools became a conservative. So I wanted to quote him, but one Rav said, you shouldn't quote Heschel. So I was like, because they do. So I once was in the college library, and a Dayan of the London Bet Din, I won't say which, was walking out of the library with 10 books by Heschel. So I said, I'm going to ask him. I said, Rav, do you quote Heschel? He said, yes. He says, but I don't quote Rabbi Heschel. I quote Dr. Heschel. And I said, why? He goes, if I quote Rabbi, they'll start thinking, who's this Rabbi? Look him up and they'll think the form, what's the Dayan saying? I'll get all confused. If I say Dr. Heschel, they'll just think, oh, it's another one of those academics that the Dayan likes to quote, and they listen to me. They'll be makabel. Now he says, in an audience that will accept him, I'll quote, but I have to know your audience. But I was learning that there's a big problem today, Eva. Orthodox are being more fundamentalist to be different to progressives. And progressives are being more radical to be different to Orthodox. And that is wrong. And I believe Hirsch rejected reform, but he still had a universalist understanding from Torah. It's clear when you read his writings. That's my thought. But I could be wrong. You have to bring me sources, but that's my reading of Hirsch.
Thank you.
I think the last hand raised is from Marcel and Ora, who wants to ask the question.
Last person standing.
Hi, it's me. Hi, Rafi.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Hi. I would like you to comment perhaps on the Aleinu prayer that we say 3 times a day, because the beginning of the prayer starts off with this kind of attitude, Shelo Sam Chelkenu Kahem, that we're not like them. And some people even say Shalom Mishtachavim Lehevel V'Lerik, and which I don't, but nevertheless, the beginning of the prayer starts off like that. The end of the prayer is with this hope that all nations
exactly.
And I find that it's interesting that we say this 3 times a day, and it kind of incorporates these different approaches.
Right, so I'll tell you 2 things. First of all, on that line that you don't say, they pray to a God that doesn't listen, right, and doesn't answer. So I did hear one interpretation of how you can say that. It was when Rabbi Yitz Greenberg met the Dalai Lama. There's a book called The Jew and the Lotus.
Oh, yeah.
Written by Roger Kamenetz, who I met in New Orleans. We became friends. He's a friend of my wife's, a lovely man. Greenberg explained it as follows. In Buddhism, God is nothingness. And you don't talk to God directly, you experience. So you could read it as Hemish Tachlev Hevel Varik. They believe in a God of nothingness, in a God that doesn't answer. They believe in pure spirituality. That's their interpretation, not negative, just different. But we talk to you. That's one thing. Now, in terms of the issue of Aleinu, you're exactly right. I interviewed Rabbi Sachs on his new book, Morality, in March of 2020. And I said to him, Rabbi Sachs, I said, I'm sitting in my house. This is during COVID lockdown. And he was in his, if you look on the LSJS website, you can see this video of me talking to him. And I said, Rabbi Sachs, I'm sitting in my house. And yes, Noam Hertig's mentioning that the gematria of Rick is Yeshu, it's Jesus. That's the negative one. Thank you, Noam. Absolutely right, Hertig. But anyway, I was sitting in my house. I said to Rav Sachs, I said, when I pray Rafa'enu, and when I pray, I don't want to just pray for Am Yisrael. The whole world is suffering from COVID. I don't want to just pray to Am Yisrael. I want to pray for the world. And he said, Rafi, absolutely. There is a particularist strand in Tefillah and a universalistic strand. And he gave lots of examples. And the main one he gave was Aleinu. One half is us with God, our particular relationship. And then we say, Hashem Echad Shmachad, the whole world should recognize. He said, absolutely, Rafi. And he said yesterday, a few weeks before, when he launched his book, just before, and he was in public, he gave a prayer for the whole world for tefillot. He said, absolutely. He banged his hand on the table. Absolutely. We think for ourselves because you care for your family first, and then you care for your people, and then you care for the whole world. So there's a particular strand and a universal strand. It's not one or the other. It's not this or this. It's this and this. And we have that strand. For thousands of years, we didn't have the freedom to help the world. They hated us. They were trying to destroy us. And that made us think that everybody hated us. Esav Sonat Yaakov, right? But that was also a curse from Bilam. The idea was to turn it around. And one day to be, when they're ready, finally, that people will listen to Jews. And today, people listen to Jews. So not everybody, but they listen to Jews. And we can be a great moral example. That's my answer.
I think that was a very nice conclusion to your journey. You took us through and explaining us why being the chosen people is being a role model, and that we should all lead by example. So let us take this message into the new week And we are already now, I guess, looking forward to hopefully then really see you next year in person here in Zurich and welcoming you into our community
My
for
pleasure.
a proper weekend.
My pleasure. My pleasure. You should be safe and healthy and all good things. All good things. I'll see you soon.
Thank you very much, and Shavua Tov to everybody.